that. I got stuck eventually at my mother's home. I couldn't get out. And what does a missionary do when you're stuck at home, you know? And so I had an idea to start reaching out to people in closed countries, trying to connect with them and send them information and reach them. And to make that story short enough, where we get to the love part, I met a doctor this way in Somalia, and we began to study. And oh, he was so resistant because one of his Somali beliefs is that to study a religion other than Islam is shirk. And in English, that means you're avoiding your duty. But in Islam, in Arabic, it means unpardonable sin. And to study, so to get him to even study was difficult. But eventually, we talked it through how if you love God, then you want to know more about him. So of course you're going to study. And if you're checking to make sure you're right, of course God looking down is going to be happy that you're checking that, because it means you care. That it's because you care that you're going to check on what you believe. And he thought that through, and he decided to check and see, and he read Ministry of Healing. And I remember the day he held up a picture of the Ministry of Healing and the Quran, a picture of both, and he said, I know these are both inspired books, but they disagree. It was a crisis of faith for him. He knew he can't follow both because, you know, they're not the same. I don't know if you've ever read the Quran, but it's nothing like Ministry of Healing. And so he was thinking those, and eventually, after about a year, he gave his life to Jesus and became a believer in Somalia. You might not have any idea of how rare that is, but it was 30 years ago, the last time we baptized a man from Somalia. And so I had a plan. Heidi and I had a plan. We were returning from doing some work for Muslims in Senegal, helping start a school there. Oh no, the children are leaving. Have a good time. You all take good care of them, okay? But, we were returning from Senegal, and we stopped, and we had tickets to stop in Somalia. But you can ask me later why, but the government of Somalia communicated to me through that doctor, please don't come. They didn't say you can't. They didn't say we'll stop you. They just said we don't have enough force to protect you. They said that Al-Shabaab is planning an attack on our city right now, and we think as soon as you show up at the airport, the news will get to them, and they will immediately be after you, and would you just please not come? That's what they said. And everyone that was around me said that that was good advice, so we changed our plan, and we went to a country that was nearby. Because this is live stream right now, right? So I just can't give so many details as I'd give you if we weren't that way. We went to a nearby country, and we flew that doctor to that nearby country, and he was baptized. It was that week, he wasn't baptized the same day he flew. We spent a week with him beforehand, because, you know, he had never met a Christian before. That was like when we picked him up at the airport, that's his first time meeting Christians. And so we're talking to him and sharing and having Bible study every day, afternoon, evening, making sure, because when you learn things electronically, your electronic learning you do really isn't as effective as the paper learning you do. I don't know if you've ever tried measuring those two types of learning against each other, but you can learn a lot electronically and not know very much when you get done. And so we did some catch up to him, and he was ready for baptism, and he was baptized. There were only about 6 of us present at the baptism, and all 5 that were intended to be there were told plainly, no pictures, no video. But the man who let us in decided to come in with us, you know, who opened the church, and he was so excited at what was going on, and just as the doctor was about to be baptized, he whipped out his smartphone, and I had to run in front of him and say, no, erase that. You can't do that. And he's, and he was apologetic. And we still had the baptism. This might not sound like a love story to you, but just listen. So that dear doctor went back to Somalia, where he has a practice and where he's doing his best. He's risking his life every time he does it, trying to share with people. But while we were in that neighboring country, we found out that that man who was baptized 30 years ago married an Adventist. He left Somalia, married an Adventist, and had a daughter. And that daughter grew up as a mission-minded Seventh-day Adventist girl. And she's half Somali. And she studied medical missionary work. And she decided last year, not even knowing about our friend the doctor, that she was going to go as a lone single medical missionary to Somalia. And she went, and you know, the place where she began practicing is only 10 miles from where our doctor lives. So it was while we were in the neighboring country, because we were there, that he found out she existed. And because of that, she found out he existed. And now, the two of them, it seemed impossible that God would ever find proper companionship for either of them. I mean, there's no one in the planet for them. There's no one in the whole planet for them. But he put them right next to each other. And now they're dating. Isn't that beautiful? That's missions. Missions is a place of miracles. And I'm just thankful for that. And it'd be nice if they can multiply the church in Somalia by organic means. You know, that's when a church is really alive, when it starts to multiply in every which way. Turn in your Bibles to John chapter 7. I'm going to talk to you about reaching non-Christians in non-Christian countries. And just lay down a few facts first. John chapter 7 and verse 7. This is Jesus speaking to his own half-brothers. No, I guess they're step-brothers, not half-brothers. Speaking to his own step-brothers. He says, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me. Is there a reason why the world hates King Jesus? The verse clarifies, doesn't it? Because I testify of it, that its works are evil. The first principle I want to lay down for you is there's no way, no proper way to reach the non-Christians without some of them hating you. There's no proper way to reach the non-Christians without the ones called the world hating you. If you're doing it right, how's the world going to feel about you? Jesus said, it hated me first. He said, the disciple is not above his Lord. If they've called me dirty names, they're going to call you dirty names too. That's what he said. Beelzebub's a dirty name. Do you know that there has been a study, an academic study in missions for decades now, in that field called missiology, to figure out how to reach people without them hating you? And a way has been found to reach Muslims without them hating you. But I want to show you that before they studied it, it was actually in the scripture. If they'd gone to the scripture, they could have found out right away how to reach the Muslims without the Muslims hating them. Look at Galatians chapter 5. Galatians 5 has the key to safe missions. I did not say proper missions. Galatians 5 and verse 11. It says, and I, brothers, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased. Let me say that as a principle. You're safe if you're not teaching the offensive parts of your religion. If you're not teaching the offensive parts of your religion, no one's going to get up in arms against you. So what's happened, because you know we have about 1.2 maybe billion Muslims in the world. That's 1.2 billion Muslims the way that Christians count. I've never met a Muslim that counts the same way. That is, the Shia don't think that the Sunni are Muslims, and the Sunni don't think the Shia are Muslims, and the Sufi don't think anyone else is a Muslim, and the others don't think Sufi's a Muslim, and they don't count. But the way we count, there's about 1.2 billion of them. And that 1.2 billion, we can reach them without them hating us if we just leave out a few facts that they dislike a lot. One of those facts is the idea of being a Christian. They dislike it so much. But in missions, there's an insider movement, and in the insider movement, the man stays inside the mosque. He becomes a believer that Jesus is his Savior, that Jesus died for him. He believes that, which is not really in harmony with Islam. And he believes in paying tithe, and he believes that Jesus is coming back. So you could say that man, and he keeps the Sabbath. There are maybe 100,000 people in the category I'm describing right now on the planet, behind closed doors. He believes in those things, but he believes some other things too. He also believes that the Quran is a good book. I assure you, it is not. He believes that Muhammad was the last prophet. I assure you, he was not. And because they have these two particular beliefs, it's impossible to take that man with those two beliefs and lead him into the full business of Adventism. I was talking to one of my workers this morning. She's in Afghanistan, and she asked me to reply to a lady. That lady said to her, "Why doesn't God send us a prophet now? We're in such confusion." Because the two of them have been talking now for a week or two about the weaknesses of Islam and some of the values of Christianity, and she's been hearing Islamic propaganda all her life. And so what's happened, it's not that she's figured out that Christianity is right. What she's figured out is it's not as straightforward and black and white as it seemed like it was when she was growing up. That she's become less stable. And so she said, "Why doesn't God send us another prophet? We're so confused." So I replied this morning while you all were singing in the song service. That was while I was sitting there. I said, in fact, he did send us a recent prophet named Ellen White. And that when we are using all the materials that have been sent us that way, he intends to send us many more. And I sent that there to Afghanistan, and probably even now while we're sitting here, which it's late night there, probably my worker there has forwarded this to that lady, and for the first time she's learning there's a lady named Ellen White, a female prophet. She'd never heard of a female prophet before, I'm sure, because there's no such thing in the Quran as a female prophet. Are there female prophets in our book? Deborah and Miriam and Huldah and the four daughters of Philip. Yeah, we have them, Anna. So it's not such a new thing for us, but for Islam, it's a very new thing. So what I'm trying to say to you is that I am opposed, and I hope that you will oppose with your purse, voice, and pen, to the insider movement of evangelism that leads people from Islam to half-baked Islam Adventism, that really doesn't know the call out of Babylon, that really doesn't know about the spirit of prophecy, the testimony of Jesus, that really can never be quite straight on hell. Because the Quran is so seriously teaching of a sadistic, ever-eternal burning hell. It's there more than a score of times in graphic detail. Like Dante's Inferno does not beat the Quran. And it's so, as long as someone treats that book as inspired, they'll never end up on that comforting message that we have. But if you try to lead someone from that half-baked into the real thing, you're going to have whichever part of that is our sheep searching for a shepherd, they're going to come with you. And whichever of them are the world are going to hate you. Who hated Jesus? The world. You know, it wasn't because of his theology. It's because he testified of it that its works are evil. It's because you condemn smoking and beating of children and wives, and lying and cheating, and hatred and revenge, and murder and pornography, and watching violent movies and masturbation. It's because you condemn those things that the world, that part of the world, sees as acceptable, that something rises up in the world and says, yeah, I don't know if it actually speaks. The way the world hated Jesus mostly was like taking him to a brow and trying to push him off the brow of a hill. So I'm taking too long on my first point, and I want to get to some others. Let me talk to you a bit about the love Jesus has for the heathen. Look at Ezekiel 20. Ezekiel 20. Adventists typically come to this chapter for verse 12 and verse 20. That's usually what we come here for. And that's not the only reason to come to this chapter. There are other verses in it. You can summarize this chapter as the story of God saving the people of Israel, or trying to save them for the sake of reaching the heathen. And without me reading the chapter to you, I'm going to tell you what it says, and you can just look through it and see that I'm telling you the truth. God says that Israel became so idolatrous, even in the land of Egypt, that he could have destroyed them there for their idolatry. However, that would have confused the Egyptians. If God had destroyed the Israelites in Egypt, the Egyptians never would have become worshipers of Jehovah. You understand that? And so God says here that for the heathen's sake, that would be, I wrote down the verse numbers, so that'd be verse 9. If you're there, why don't you look at verse 9. It says, "But I acted for my name's sake, that it should not be profaned among the Gentiles, among whom they were, in whose sight I had made myself known to them, to bring them out of the land of Egypt." God said, because I loved the Egyptians, I didn't destroy Israel. Well, that gets you very quickly to verse 12. In verse 12, God says to them, "I gave you my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and you, that you might know that I am the Lord your God that sanctifies you." And if you've ever taught these topics from the Bible, you might wonder, why is this idea in there twice? Why is it in verse 12 and verse 20? Well, that's because when they get out on the way to Canaan, God is ready to destroy them again for their rebellion. And again, he spares them because he loves the heathen. Look at verse 14. "But I acted for my name's sake, that it should not be profaned before the Gentiles, in whose sight I had brought them out." God said, if I destroy them right here, then the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and the Hittites and the Canaanites and the Egyptians, who've seen all these miracles, are going to lose any interest in the truth. It's going to go away. So he spared them. But he said to their children, speaking to the children, that's probably verse 18. Verse 18, it says, "But I said to their children in the wilderness, do not walk in the statutes of your fathers, nor observe their judgments, nor defile yourselves with their idols." You know, there are people who say that the Adventist church was abandoned by God after 1888, after the big fiasco that happened there. I just want to tell you that this verse we just read shows you what really happened. God doesn't reject the church because that would confuse the whole world. He rejects the generation. And he says to their children, don't do like your parents. Why? Because if he destroyed the church, the world would be confused. If God had destroyed Sabbath-keeping Adventists, who would ever have wanted to become a Sabbath-keeping Adventist after that? So for the sake of the heathen, he spared. In verse 22, nevertheless, I withdrew my hand and acted for my name's sake, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the Gentiles, in whose sight I had brought them out. What I want you to see is that in Ezekiel 20, the heathen figure front and center in God's purposes. That his reasoning is because he cares about them. That's what he's after. That's what he's pushing for. What you see in the world today, like when you read through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, you might think that everything is about Israel. If you do think that, it's not because you read carefully. When God speaks to Abraham, even initially and over, he says, through you, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. It never really was just Israel. They were just a means to an end. They weren't the end. So that's a theological bit. I want to be sure I give you some methods too, because I think you probably have non-Christians in Tulsa. I will say a bit to you that God is not calling us to compound Adventism. He's not calling us to distance ourselves from the world so that we just kind of get in our own little sphere and take good care of ourselves. That never has that been God's plan, that we take care of ourselves to the exclusion of reaching the people who have no chances. Because you have so many chances, and that puts you under intense obligation. I would even say a debt. That's how Paul described it in Romans 1. He said, I'm a debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, to the educated and to the uneducated. He said, so then, as much as in me is, I'm ready to preach the gospel to you that be at Rome also. And where does that debt come from? That's because that debt is just the natural end product of love. Have you read that in Romans 13? It says, owe no man anything but to love one another. That's because you can't get rid of that debt. That's the one debt you can't discharge. You're always going to have it. You're always obliged. And so in our family worship this morning at the Glasser home, we were looking at Jeremiah 23, and we didn't look at this part, but in that chapter, God says, why are you stealing every one my words from your neighbor? And you start wondering, what? Are they walking over to the neighbor and stealing their Bibles? What is that? No. It's because God obliges us to share with our neighbors. And when we don't share with them, it's theft. I mean that if I gave you $20 and said, hand that to my wife, and you pocket it, it is theft, even though it's a very strange type. It's strange because it was my money, and I put it in your hand, and you didn't beg for it, and you didn't say anything. You didn't even really agree to anything. You just took it in your hand. So in some ways, it's an odd theft. But still, by you accepting it, it's implied that you understand your obligation to pass it on. If you weren't willing to pass it on to her, you shouldn't have, your thumb shouldn't have taken it. So even though it's in your hand, it really isn't yours. And if you don't pass it on, you're stealing it. I'm trying to illustrate truth. That when you accepted truth, you really shouldn't have taken it on if you didn't understand the obligation. That the obligation is on us to share. We have that, and so when we don't share, then we're stealing every man the words from our neighbor. Let me speak about mission trips, because you look like a mission trip going group. In Europe, there are lots of places where very few people encounter Adventist. In Germany, few people will encounter Adventist. In the Netherlands, few people will encounter Adventist. In most of those European countries, few people will encounter Adventist. But in Romania, you'll probably encounter an Adventist. Because there's lots of Adventists in Romania. When the Iron Curtain fell, There were more Adventists in Romania than the combined number in France and Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands and the UK and Spain and Portugal all combined. There were more. Now, if you hear that someone's going on a mission trip to Europe, do you know half the time where they're going? Do you know where they're going half the time? Something doesn't make any sense. Okay, let me try again. Suppose you're going to go on a mission trip to East Africa. The eastern part of Africa has a lot of places with few Adventists, like Somalia, for example. And you have quite a few of them. But one country that has a lot of Adventists is Kenya. Another one is Rwanda. Another one is Burundi. Actually, there's quite a few that have a lot of Adventists right around there. Let's just say that a mission trip is going to East Africa. You know where they're most likely to go? Kenya. But let me tell you, when they go to Kenya, it's a little bit more serious than that. Because Kenya has a number of states. And those states aren't evenly divvied up in terms of the knowledge of the three angels' messages. They're not. There are some states where there's very few Adventists in those states, comparatively. But there's one state that has lots of Adventists. Kisi, the Kisi state, has tons of Adventists. Maybe only 1 in 4 people, like 1 in 4 there are Adventist. So in that same country, in Nairobi, you have 1 million Somalis living there. Among the Somalis, that Somali village, if you will, not even 1 in 100,000 is a Seventh-day Adventist. 1 in 4 compared to 1 in 250,000, 1 in 4 to 250,000. It's really 1 in 1,000,000. There aren't any. I'm just imagining maybe there is one now I don't know about, but really it's none. But you know, when a mission trip goes to Kenya, I don't have to ask to make a good guess. I'll just say to someone, I bet I know what state you're going to. They'll look at me, which state? I'll say, I bet you're going to Kisi. And they'll say, how did you know? And I'll go, I don't know. That's where everyone goes. It doesn't make any sense at all. Let me try again. What if you're going to West Africa? There are lots of countries in West Africa with very few Adventists. The Gambia and Senegal and Sierra Leone, and there's quite a few of them. But there's one country there that has a lot of Adventists, and that's Ghana. Do you know where mission trips go when they go to West Africa? Now, it's interesting because in Ghana, in the south part, there are lots of Adventists. But in the north part of the country, there's very few. It's an Islamic part. Do you know where the mission trips go when they go to Ghana? It's always the south part. Every single time. That's where they're all going. And I'm saying, we don't seem to have a strategy in our mission going. It seems like we don't have a strategy. Let me go a little further. Because in Asia, there is a lot of countries that are very few Christians in those countries. Like Vietnam, and Cambodia, and Thailand, and Malaysia, and Brunei. There's a lot of them. But when people go on mission trips to Asia, you know where they typically go? The Philippines. What? In the Philippines, maybe 1 in 90 people are Seventh-day Adventist. In the other countries all the way around it, it's less than 1 in 5,000. Why are we going to the Philippines? If you're going to fly that far away, isn't there somewhere you could go that's more strategically intelligent? Now, I know I'm making you angry because you've probably gone on mission trips to all the places I'm naming. Just listen for a minute, because you might say, I went to a group in the Philippines that no one is reaching. Just wait. The Filipinos have enough people to reach all the people groups in their islands. The reason they're not doing it is because we're coming. It's because of rampant tribalism that needs to be rebuked instead of supported in a codependent way. Do you know what I mean by codependence? Codependence, that is the relationship between missionaries and the Polynesian islands. It's like this. We go to those islands because we are the doctors, nurses, and teachers in their schools and clinics. But did you know that in some of those islands, 1 in 20 people are Adventist, 1 in 40 people are Adventist, 1 in 50 people are Adventist? The reason those people aren't manning their own clinics and schools is because foreigners have been doing it for decades. If we would only back out, they would come up to the plate and develop into a wholesome church. But because we keep coming, then they keep staying at a low level, incapable of doing those things. We have to get out of the way for them to develop. Otherwise, they never will. It's a type of mission work that doesn't help, it hurts, by stopping the development of the church. But, it's very popular. I was talking to Eric yesterday about how it'd be nice to have a team of people with me reaching the Islamic people. It'd be very nice. And I don't mean a team of supporters. I sort of have a team of supporters. I meant a team of people on the ground, living, doing this kind of thing, that kind of team. But I told him people really aren't lining up to do dangerous work. Like, if you say that God has called you to Palau, no one will look at you and say, "Are you sure you're called?" They just figure, that makes sense. Of course God would call you to a warm beach. Of course, God calls people always to where there's nice corals and fishing. But if you tell someone that you're called to go to Iran or to Islamic West Africa, people will say, "Are you sure? Are you really sure?" I think it just doesn't make any sense in terms of strategy. In terms of strategy, I wish in missions that we'd start thinking about what needs to be done so we could do it. What about Thailand? Because when people do go to non-Christian countries in Asia, that's the most popular one. When they go to Thailand, Thailand has the Thai people. Do you know the Thai people are highly unreached? Like not even 1 in 5,000 are Adventist among the Thai people. And there's tens of millions of Thai. But there are 3 subgroups in Thailand that are very reached. One of them is the Filipinos that are there to work. And then there are the Christian people from Pakistan who were persecuted in Pakistan and fled to Thailand and as refugees. And then there are the Karen people. That's the Eric B. Hare fruits. Eric B. Hare when Eric B. Hare was working for the Karen, they were like the Thai are today. They were unreached. But it's not the way they are today. Today, a large portion of the Karen people are Seventh-day Adventist. And so you have maybe 2% of the population are Karen Pakistani Filipinos, and 98% are Thai. And now here goes a mission trip from the United States going to Thailand, and you can just guess what they're going to do. They're going to go to the Pakistanis or the Karen people. Or if the Filipinos are going to do a mission to Thailand, you know who they're going to reach out to? The Filipinos. And almost no one is working for the majority Thai people. So this is how I ended up living in Asia. It's why I live in Asia, why I can't wait to get back. Because I found out that countries that have Christian populations living among Muslim populations, the Christians are not trying to reach the Muslims. Because it's dangerous. That's not a good enough reason. In the book of Acts, almost everything that happens is dangerous. Almost everything that they do is dangerous in the book of Acts. Paul says that of the Jews, he was 4 times beaten, 40 stripes save 1. Or was it 5 times? I read it this morning, but I really don't remember. Anyway, even 1 would hurt a lot, and it was dangerous what Paul was doing. And so what would happen today if you go on a mission trip and you get persecuted and you're beaten 39 lashes, is the world church will pity you and recall you and conclude that work for that people group, this isn't the time to be doing it. That's not how Paul treated that. Do you understand the difference in the mentality? One mentality works and one doesn't. Look at John chapter 12. John chapter 12. In John 12, something remarkable happens. It's in verse 20. Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, Sir, we want to see Jesus. Several times in the book of John before this, Jesus says to people, my time is not yet come. He says that repeatedly, my time is not yet come, my time is not yet come. But look at verse 23. But Jesus answered them, saying that the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. He was talking about his death that was about to happen. And he said, this is the right time. Before wasn't, but this is the right time. So he doesn't turn those Gentiles away. In fact, if you look down at verse 31, he says, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out, and I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. So missiology has come to a false concept that is so pervasive of the academic circles that to not believe it would put you on the outside. And it's no fun to be on the outside when you're in academic circles. To be on the outside, you feel like you're stupid, or that's how people kind of relate to you when you're on the outside. But what the idea that's really on the inside right now is that if you want to reach the Buddhist, you need to be an expert on Buddhism. And if you want to reach the Hindus, you need to know about the Hindu writings and be an expert on Hinduism. And if you want to reach the Muslims, you need to be an expert on Islam. So I'll tell you 2 things. First, I know quite a bit about Islam. I've studied the Quran carefully. I've read it all. I've taken copious notes, written a 20-page document about it, going through every single verse. I know the Quran pretty well. And I've read a lot of the hadiths. And rarely does any of that help me in reaching a Muslim. Rarely. When you want to reach someone with the gospel, what you really need to be an expert on is Seventh-day Adventism. I'm going to see if I can say it to you so you can see it. So let's say you have here a group of 10 Muslims, and let's say that 2 of them are responding to God's Spirit, and 2 of them are responding to Satan's hating spirit. They're becoming more radicalized. And now I come to them. Let's say I come to them as a teacher of reform, teaching a higher level of Islam, calling them to a higher way. Which of these 10 do you think are going to be most interested in what I have to say? It's going to be these 2 over here. These are the ones who are going to take an interest in my insider movement because it looks to them like a reform of Islam. It looks to them like a call to a higher. But these are the same people who haven't been responding very well to God's Spirit. But if I come now saying, I have a different religion that's nonviolent. In my religion, we have peace. We love humanity. And we're even kind to animals. Do you know who's going to end up responding? It's these two. It's the two that have already been listening to the Spirit. Already they've made progress before I even meet them. When I meet them, what they notice is that my spirit matches their spirit. And so now they're coming along. And it's to bring these two all the way up to the Adventist standard is so much easier than to bring those even 1/3 of the way. Because we have a truth that requires submission to God, including thou shalt not hate. I mean, that is the 6th commandment put into a modern application. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, really includes thou shalt not hate. And hate is growing right now. There's a lot of hate around. And some of the most angry voices that have come at me in the last 2 weeks, because I've been dialoguing with hundreds of people during this 2 weeks, have come from people whose life is full of hate, especially for the Jews. They hate them. Now, I'm not a supporter of Jews, and when you're trying to reach your Muslim friends here in Tulsa, you might want to say right near the outset, like within the first couple hours of chatting, that you don't support the idea that Israel is God's favored nation, that you don't support Israel. Because I'll just let you know in case you didn't know, you don't. I mean that our teaching about Daniel 9 says that their specialness as a people ended AD 34. That was it. That God's special people are the ones whose job is to carry his special truth. And when they turned away from the special truth, they became incapable of carrying it. Did that make sense to at least one person, what I just said? At least one? So Israel is not God's special people. I don't mean that God doesn't reward righteousness wherever it exists. So if there's an Israeli man who is keeping the 10 Commandments, he'll be honored for his keeping of it. And if he's not, he won't be. That terrible massacre that happened last October 7 was at a Friday night rave. Those weren't Sabbath keepers. That makes sense to anyone, what I just said? What I'm trying to say to you is we aren't supporters of Israel. We're supporters of people who are following God's principles. We're following the whole bit. That's part of what you have to say. So, how about I tell you a mission story or two and then summarize and sit down? When I was in Malaysia, there was a lady there who opened the elevator for Heidi and I. Her name is Hamida. And the way she did it was kind of noble looking. I'm always looking for noble people. Like my eye is peeled for nobility. I am trying to, because when you're in a country where 1 in 5,000 people are Adventist, and you're the one person trying to reach them, there's not time to find everyone by just trying every door. There's not time for that method. You got to find some more efficient means. And so one of those is I'm looking for those people who show some evidence that the Spirit of God is moving on them. People that help us in some way or do something. And when someone helps me, I want to get their contact info and follow up on that and make sure it works. And so I was looking, and Hamida opened the door for Heidi and I in a way that caught my eye. And so I got her contact info through Heidi because I can't really talk directly to a Muslim lady about getting her contact info. It's too weird. So it's a good thing I have a wife. And so I got Hamida's contact information, but when Heidi was writing Hamida in those next few days, it really was me. And I tried to interest her in Bible studies. Do you know, I couldn't do it. Because Hamida had an idea that all religions are the same. She had gone to a Catholic school when she was in primary school, and she was quite ecumenical in her thinking. I mean, she wasn't saying Islam is the only way. She was saying, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Catholicism, whatever, it's all about the same. But she didn't have any interest in searching, no deep dives for her. Because if you change religion from Islam, you end up with big problems. So if it's all the same, what's the reason to change? You understand her logic? And I tried and failed to convince her that they're not all the same. But when I realized this was going nowhere, I looked through her friends list on Facebook, and I found a guy who was the director of the international club at a nearby university. So I wrote him. His name is Muhammad. And I'm using real names because these people don't become Christians, but when I get to the people who do, I'm not going to use their real names. Muhammad, I wrote to him, and Muhammad began to take studies. We studied Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9. He came camping with us and with a few other people, and there came a point when we had just he and I were having a very serious conversation, and it hit him that if he accepts the things that he's learning, he might lose his job. He might lose his scholarship. He was doing graduate work. He might lose his family. He might even lose his life. And when he realized it, he decided, no. He didn't reject me as a friend. After that, we can talk about weather and politics, but when we come to talk about truth, he says, no, he's not talking anymore. It's all over. Now, you might think it's all a waste, but I'll say, I think in the great controversy, that was not a waste. I think that before I met Muhammad, he didn't really have a fair chance to make a decision. And now he got a fair chance. And giving him a chance was worthwhile. But before he blocked me, because he eventually did, I looked through his friends list, and I found someone whose name I'm going to call Mustafa. It's not the real name. And I wrote to Mustafa, and to make the story short enough, Mustafa and his good friend, who I'll call Jack, because that's not his real name, Mustafa and Jack wanted to meet Heidi and I. So we met them at a restaurant there in Malaysia and studied, and they were both on their way towards atheism. That's where they were headed. They were from Yemen, and they had been in Yemen when the Houthis took over. Do you know that Yemen has imams on television that are teaching? Like teaching imams on television? Like you can turn on your television in Yemen and get good, solid teaching from Islamic scholars. And some of those are very popular scholars. And before the Houthis took over, they were all Sunni scholars. But the Houthis are Shia. And when the Houthis took over, those very same televangelists, if you will, in 1 week they changed from teaching Sunni Islam to teaching Shia Islam. And it devastated 1 million people because it made religion look fake. Can you understand what I'm saying? It'd be like if you were baptized by a televangelist into Adventism, and 2 years later you see him on television saying that we all should honor the Pope and become Roman Catholic. It could be a real crisis of faith for you, couldn't it? Especially if he did it under pressure. If he did it under pressure, it would look like that maybe he's just going with the wind, whatever pays and wherever there's less pressure, just kind of do like that. And then that would have really... So that happened. That's why they were headed to skepticism. And as we studied with them, both of them accepted Jesus. and began practicing, I'd call it pre-Adventism. I mean, it's that thing it's you when that year before you were baptized. You're learning a lot of things, you're doing what you know, but there's still a lot more to learn. Has anyone ever been through that experience, or did you all grow up in the church? So some of you have been through that experience. There's a bit to learn in this church, isn't there? And so they're in that learning experience, and but one of them one day, the second one, the one I called Jack, which is not his name, we were sitting at a meal, and he asked Heidi and I a very serious question. He said, "Is it okay for a Christian to marry a Muslim?" Let me put some context on that for you. In Yemen, they have hormones just like you. They really want to get married, but they have to pay a $5,000 dowry, and they don't earn enough money to get it before they're like 50 years old. Like they're earning like $100 a month, and they just can't manage. And there's lots of couples in waiting and a lot of premarital sex in Yemen because of this. They're like putting marriage too difficult to get to, out there. And I gotta be sure I always call him Jack. Mr. Jack had a sweetheart from his primary school days that he intended to marry. And he had been saving up money to marry her, and he was just about there. Like he'd been thinking about her for like 15 years. And now he becomes a Christian. He's been a Christian for a few weeks, and the thought suddenly hits him. And so he asked us. That's the context of the question. Is it okay to bring our religion down to meet him in that kind of extenuating circumstance? Can we adjust to make it fit him? Doesn't it seem kind of cruel to tell him the truth? Anyway, I told him the truth. And from that minute, Jack's interest in spiritual things began to get cooler and cooler and cooler. And he married the girl. And they had a baby. And some time around, before the baby was born, but after the marriage happened, some man in his university found Jesus somehow on the internet. I tell you, it's not a good place to go looking, but if you happen to look in that barren land, sometimes God will guide you. And he left Islam and began sharing the Catholic Christianity that he found there, and it got him in hot water. He lost his scholarship and was suddenly out of school. He's from Yemen, studying in Malaysia, and I heard about him, and I wrote him, and some people in this country helped out, and we paid his tuition to go back to school. And he began having a study group, reaching people at the university. And as Jack saw that, it made him cry, because he saw in that zeal what he had felt just months before. He saw what he remembered of peace, and he wanted it again. And he gave his life back to Jesus and began helping there in the university. And he ended up emigrating to France, and he began attending church there. And he told me just 2 weeks ago his wife has taken an interest in the truth now. It's beautiful, isn't it? Do you remember how this story started? It was 2 false starts. Hamida didn't work out. Muhammad didn't work out. What I want to say to you about methods is don't quit with false starts. The first thing I said to you is don't quit with persecution. When you get those first 39 lashes, you still have work to do. But we're so soft-bellied that sometimes we just quit when we get a rejection. I'd say don't do that either, because The people really need help. So a summary of all that I've said today is that God cares about the heathen as much today as he ever has. He really cares about them. There is a growing hatred in the world today that's making it harder and harder to save people, but there are people everywhere of whom the Lord has need. There are people everywhere who are responding to his Spirit, and they are beginning to become easier to see because they're becoming more different than people. But we need people to live and work in those places. Some of you have retired, and some of you are going to retire soon. I tell you, if you're retired, would you just kiss your grandchildren goodbye and go live in one of those countries? You can do it on your retirement. Your American retirement is enough to live in almost any of the countries I've mentioned today as a good place to work. Germany accepted. But as far as Asia, almost any of those countries, you could live there on your local retirement. Why not? If you really need your grandchildren, convince your children to come live with you. They could put in their resumes and maybe get jobs over there. And if you're going to study at the university, why not do your graduate studies at an Islamic school? Why not be in a place where you could reach people who never have a chance otherwise? Why are you so stuck in places where Adventism is thick? A week ago, I guess it's a week and 2 days. Yeah, it's about right. A week and 2 days ago, one of my workers in Malaysia was laying in bed. It was her last night in the dorm. She's an undercover missionary studying medicine there in Malaysia. That's what she is, an undercover missionary studying medicine. And she had found a private lodging, so she was going to be moving out of the dorm to private lodging. But the last night there, she went to bed about 8, but about 11:30, she woke up with this strong impression to get up, get dressed, and go to the neighboring, like the adjacent apartment and check on the girl that was sleeping there. I don't know if you trust your impressions when you wake up in the middle of the night, but they aren't always the most reliable impressions. They're not always. But somehow she knew the voice of the shepherd, and she got up and she got dressed, and when she went over there, that girl had just taken an entire bottle of pills to kill herself. And not Heidi, I almost used her name. That young lady took that student to the hospital. They took care of her there. She's no lasting harm because she got there quite soon. Hospitals know what to do about those kind of situations, and she's taking Bible studies now. She's doing it. What I'm trying to say to you without saying it, but now I'll say it, is that media will not finish the work. Media is like, it helps you find the person that needs the help. It doesn't help reach them. Media helps us locate the searcher, but it doesn't satisfy their searching. I learned this before I went to Asia, when I was still a call porter, even working here in Oklahoma. When I was at Oklahoma Academy, I had printed 100,000 copies of Happiness Digest, that's Steps to Christ. And by having them printed myself, I put in the back my contact information. I don't mean my personal, for how to get more stuff, where I would know when they did it, and pictures, so that the people who get that book can contact us after they read it and get more. And I sort of imagined that with 100,000, maybe we'd get 2 or 3 on the 1,000. That would mean 200 or 300 people that would contact us from the 100,000. Don't you think Steps to Christ is a beautiful book? Hasn't it changed your life? So we left those 100,000 in people's houses, and less than 5 contacted us. And what I realized from that experience is that evangelism is a personal work. that those two boys I mentioned need a lot of personal attention. And that girl in that next door room needed a personal visit. And if she had seen a nice media ad, she might have clicked it, but that wouldn't do it. That would help us find her, but it wouldn't help us reach her. Do you understand what I'm trying to say to you? So do we need the media? Sure, we need to find the people, but what we really need is you. We need people. We need people to be talking to the people. We need people to be patient with the people. People to face rejection and then to keep going and to keep pushing. And you know, when I told you about Jack, that guy, that fake name I used for him it was 2 pushes. There was the first push, and then it went cold, and then a second push. It's like that. And have you heard about dreams happening? I thought you would all say, yeah, we've heard it. Yeah, because it seems like the marketing about the dreams is high. Well, I just want to clarify about the dreams a bit. People are having dreams that they should join the Catholic Church, and dreams to join the Baptist Church, and dreams to join the Pentecostal Church, and dreams to join the Adventist Church. And Adventist Muslims are having dreams to go back to Islam. Dreams just go whichever way. You tend to dream about what you think about. And when you think a lot, and Muslims are thinking about the end of time, and they believe that Jesus is coming back. And if you think about the end of time and believe he's coming back, you know what you might dream about? Coming back. Do you follow the logic of what I just said to you? Dreams might lead someone to search, but they sure won't finish the searching. What's really needed, when God used dreams in the book of Acts, he never used the dreams as a substitute for study. That when Cornelius had a dream and Peter had a dream, it was to get them together and study together, to have a Bible study in the same place, person to person. The dream was not in place of the Bible study. And when Saul, becoming Paul, had that dream on the way to Damascus, that dream did not fill him with the knowledge. The dream told him to wait for Ananias, and Ananias had a dream. Ananias gave studies to Paul. You understand what I'm trying to say to you? That don't comfort yourself thinking that dreams from the inside and media from the outside, and oh, God is reaching the world, and I can just grow my tomatoes. No, no, no. It isn't so. Dreams from the inside and media from the outside, and that's why you're needed to help finish the work for people who don't have many chances. And is it possible to do the work so that you don't end up being persecuted? It's possible if you don't preach the cross. It's possible if you don't preach the real truth we have for this time. And if you do that, you're not giving the real message. So you're not really helping. Let me pray for us. Our Father in heaven, I'm asking that you would raise up workers as you've raised up funds. That you would do something to help your church finish the work in foreign places. I ask for you to do that in the name of Jesus. Amen.